Day 1. Jaycee Dugard, 18 years behind bars. Antioch, California, 1999 to 2009. For 10 years, government officials regularly inspected this house. They knocked on the door, spoke with the owner, noted in their reports that everything was in order, and left. During that time, they visited him about 60 times. And not once did they go into the backyard. Behind that fence, just a few meters away from them, lived a kidnapped child. But let's start from the beginning. Myers, California, June 10, 1991, 8 a.m. Myers is a small mountain community situated at an elevation of nearly 1,900 meters in the Sierra Nevada, about 5,000 residents. Pine forest, neighbors who know each other by name, children riding their bikes freely, the kind of place where parents weren't afraid to let their child walk to the bus stop a few dozen meters from home. Jaycee Dugard was 11 years old, blonde hair, a wide smile. Neighbors and classmates remembered her as a cheerful, outgoing girl who loved to laugh. That morning, at the end of the school year, when the children were already thinking about summer, her stepfather, Carl Probin, drove her to the school bus stop, literally around a corner from their house, and returned to the yard to go about his morning chores. A few minutes later, a gray sedan drove past the bus stop. It pulled up next to Jaycee. A man got out of the car, 40-year-old Philip Garrido from Antioch, California, 300 miles away. He used a stun gun on the 11-year-old girl standing at the bus stop and dragged her into the car. His wife, Nancy, was sitting behind the wheel. It all happened in a matter of seconds. Carl Probin saw it from his yard. He jumped on his bike and chased after the car, but the gray sedan disappeared before he could get close. Carl stood in the middle of the road, staring into space, then turned around and ran to call 911. Jaycee Dugard's search began the very same day and quickly became one of the largest search operations in El Dorado County history. Thousands of volunteers, search dog, helicopters, and the FBI Sacramento field office were involved. Thousands of calls and tips about possible sightings poured in from across California and Nevada. Every lead was investigated. None of them led to Jaycee. Carl Probin provided investigators with a description of a gray sedan and a man armed with a stun gun, but there was no license plate number and no clear identifying details that could narrow the search in a state with millions of gray cars. The investigation focused on South Lake Tahoe and neighboring Nevada. It never reached the Bay Area. Detectives never seriously examined Contra Costa County or the city of Antioch in the East Bay, nearly 300 kilometers from the abduction site, where Philip Garrido lived and where Jaycee was already being held. The case stalled within the first few weeks. With each passing year, it grew colder. Jaycee's mother, Terry Probin, refused to give up. She searched for her daughter for years, across California, across Nevada, wherever even the smallest lead appeared. She had no idea that her daughter was living just 2 hours away the entire time. 1976. 15 years before Jaycee's abduction. To understand how this story happened, you need to understand one thing. Philip Garrido was already a kidnapper. In 1976, he abducted a young woman named Catherine Calloway Hall. He transported her across state lines, held her captive, and repeatedly abused her until law enforcement finally tracked him down. A court found him guilty. On paper, the sentence looked like one that should have kept him behind bars for the rest of his life. 50 years in federal prison and a life sentence under Nevada state law. But the system worked differently. 1988, 11 years later, despite the severity of his crimes, Garrido was granted parole. After serving roughly 11 years, he was released. His victim, Catherine Hall, tried to warn the authorities. She personally contacted his parole officer and said Garrido remained dangerous. She asked for stricter supervision and closer monitoring. Her warnings were not taken seriously. 1991. 3 years later, Philip Garrido pulled up to a school bus stop near South Lake Tahoe. His next victim was an 11-year-old girl named Jaycee Dugard. 1554, Walnut Avenue, Antioch, California. Day 1 of captivity. Jaycee, age 11. Jaycee was taken to a house on a quiet suburban street in Antioch, California. To the neighbors, it looked like an ordinary family home. Nothing seemed out of place. What they could not see was hidden behind the house. Shielded by tall fences, dense trees, tops, and makeshift barriers, Philip Burrito had created a separate world beyond public view. Over time, he expanded it into a collection of sheds and tents covering roughly 85 square meters. This was where Jaycee disappeared from the outside world. During the first years of captivity, she lived in near total isolation. She was not allowed beyond the compound and had contact with only Philip and Nancy Garrido. No school, no friends, no freedom, no way to ask for help. Only days earlier, she had been an 11-year-old girl living with her family near South Lake Tahoe. Now she was trapped in a world completely controlled by her abductor. While parole officers continued to record Phil Garrido as complied with the terms of his release, Jaycee remained hidden behind the fences of 1554 Walnut Avenue. 1994, Jaycee, age 14, 3 years in captivity. In 1994, Jaycee gave birth to her first child, a daughter fathered by Garrido. No doctor, no hospital, no medical support for the 14-year-old mother or her newborn child. The birth took place inside the same hidden backyard compound where she was being held. 1997, Jaycee, age 17, 6 years in captivity. A second daughter was born under the same conditions. Both girls grew up inside that compound. No birth certificates, no school, no official record that they even existed. Whenever anyone asked, Garrido claimed they were his granddaughters. The birth of her first child changed everything for Jaycee, not in terms of freedom, but in terms of survival. She was no longer thinking only about herself. There was now a child who depended on her. It gave her a reason to keep going and prevented her from taking desperate risks. Garrido maintained control through more than just force. He built a complex system of psychological domination based on complete isolation, total dependence, and fanatical religious beliefs. He saw himself as a prophet with a special mission from God and created a closed world inside the compound, where Jaycee and her daughters lived as though it were the only reality they had ever known. In her memoir, A Stolen Life, Jaycee later described the difficult psychological process she went through during those years, how she learned to survive, protect her daughters, and adapt to circumstances where there seemed to be no alternatives. She also explained why escaping was far more complicated than many outsiders imagined. 1999 to 2009, 10 years, 60 visits. While Jaycee and her daughters were living in the hidden backyard compound, the federal parole system was carrying out its routine procedures. From 1999 to 2009, parole officers conducted 60 visits to the house on Walnut Avenue. They arrived, knocked on the door, spoke with Garrido on the front porch, noted in their files that he was complying with the conditions of parole, and left. 60 times in 10 years. Not once did a parole officer enter the backyard to inspect the compound Garrido had built and continued expanding behind the house. This was despite the fact that a full property inspection is a basic requirement when supervising convicted sex offender on parole, despite the fact that Garrido had a history of kidnapping and holding victims captive, despite the fact that his criminal record contained more than enough information for any officer to understand that a brief conversation at the front door was not enough. Jaycee and her daughters were living just a few meters away from those officers. The only thing separating them were a fence and a few tops. 2006, Jaycee, age 26, 15 years in captivity. A neighbor reported to the Antioch Police Department that people appeared to be living in tents in Garrido's backyard and that children's voices could be heard coming from the property. Police officers arrived at Walnut Avenue. They spoke with Garrido near the front entrance. They never entered the backyard. The report was closed with a simple conclusion: no violations found. Jaycee, her 2 daughters, and 15 years of evidence of a kidnapping were sitting just beyond the gates where those officers had stood before turning around and leaving. 2008, 17 years in captivity. Another investigation. The parole agency launched its own investigation into Garrido after receiving reports about his unusual behavior. Investigators arrived at Walnut Avenue and questioned him. Once again, Nobody inspected the backyard. August 24, 2009, 18 years in captivity. Philip Garrido arrived at the University of California, Berkeley, with two teenage girls, the daughters he had fathered with Jaycee Dugard. He was seeking permission to hold events for his religious group, God's Desire. Jaycee remained in Antioch. Lisa Campbell, an events manager with the University Police Department, met him first. Something immediately felt wrong. Garrido spoke obsessively about his religious mission, while the two girls beside him appeared withdrawn and unusually submissive. Rather than confront him, Campbell scheduled a second meeting for the following day and alerted Officer Ally Jacobs. Jacobs ran Garrido through law enforcement databases and discovered that he was a registered sex offender on federal parole for a 1976 kidnapping and rape conviction. The concern was immediate. A convicted kidnapper had appeared on university campus with two teenage girls he claimed were his daughters, yet no children were listed in his parole records. August 25, 2009, Campbell and Jacobs met with Garrido again, careful not to reveal their suspicions. They wanted to keep him talking while authorities gathered more information. During the meeting, Garrido produced a self-published book about schizophrenia and began discussing his beliefs. Afterward, Jacobs contacted parole officer Edward Santos and reported everything they had observed. Santos immediately ordered Garrido to report to parole office in Concord and to bring everyone living with him. August 26, 2009, Garrido arrived at the parole office in Concord with Nancy, two teenage girls, and a young woman he introduced as his niece, Alyssa. Investigators separated everyone and conducted individual interviews. During questioning, Garrido eventually admitted that he had kidnapped Jaycee Dugard in 1991 and kept her captive for years. The young woman sitting in the interview room, who had identified herself as Alyssa, also revealed her true identity. The 11-year-old girl who had been standing at a school bus stop in Myers, California, on the morning of June 10, 1991. The same girl whose stepfather, Carl Probin, had chased a kidnapper on a bicycle but failed to catch him, was now a 29-year-old woman. For the first time in 18 years, she told authorities her real name, Jaycee Lee Dugard. Evening of August 26, 2009, 18 years, 2 months, and 16 days of silence. That same evening, the FBI arranged a phone call. Jaycee was in a secure location in Northern California. Her mother, Terry Probin, was hundreds of miles away in Southern California. And then she heard a voice she'd been waiting to hear for more than 18 years. August 27, 2009. The next morning, the following morning, Terry flew to Northern California. There, for the first time in 18 years, she saw her daughter again. And for the first time in her life, she met two granddaughters she never knew existed. Tina Dugard, Jaycee's aunt, who was present at the reunion, later recalled,
"The smile on my sister's face was as wide as the ocean. Her oldest daughter was finally home. We laughed, cried, and were just happy to be together again."
But during that reunion, the family learned another detail that left them stunned. All those years, Jaycee had been living in Antioch, California. While Terry spent years searching for her daughter across California and Nevada, Jaycee was less than a 2-hour drive away, not on the other side of the country, not somewhere overseas, just about 180 miles away, a distance that could be covered in a single day. April 2011, Philip and Nancy Garrido were arrested on August 26, 2009, at a parole office in Concord, California. Nearly 2 years later, the case was finally approaching its conclusion. Prosecutors filed dozens of charges, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, multiple counts of sexual assault, rape during the commission of a kidnapping, and lewd acts with a child under the age of 14. In April 2011, both defendants pleaded guilty. Philip Garrido admitted guilt to 1 count of kidnapping and 13 counts of sexual assault. Nancy Garrido pleaded guilty to kidnapping and 1 count of rape. The plea agreement was reached in part to spare Jaycee and her 2 daughters from having to testify in open court and relive the events of the previous 18 years. After the guilty pleas were entered, Jaycee released a brief statement.
"I am relieved that Philip and Nancy Garrido have finally accepted responsibility and admitted to the crimes they committed against me and my family."
June 2011, Jaycee was not present in the courtroom when the sentences were handed down. Instead, she submitted a written victim impact statement. In it, she explained that she chose not to attend because she refused to spend another second of her life in the presence of the people who had taken 18 years from her. She wrote that she had hated every second of every day during her captivity, and that they had stolen not only her life, but the lives of her entire family. Her statement was read aloud in court by Terry Probin, the mother who had lost her 11-year-old daughter in 1991 and 18 years later had finally seen her return home. Judge Douglas Pfister then delivered the sentence. He described Philip Garrido as a textbook sexual predator and sentenced him to 431 years to life in prison. Nancy Garrido received a sentence of 36 years to life. Philip Garrido was 60 years old at the time of sentencing. The court's decision left little doubt. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The state of California paid Jaycee Dugard $20 million, the largest settlement in state history related to failures in the parole system. The payment was not compensation for 18 years of captivity. It was an acknowledgement that what happened was not only the crime of Philip and Nancy Garrido. It was also a failure of a system that had multiple opportunities to discover the truth and failed to act. Yet there is another side to the story. Two people, without a warrant, DNA evidence, or advanced technology, noticed what dozens of parole officers had missed for years. Not because they were experts, but because they trusted their instincts when something did not feel right, and chose to act instead of walking away. 2011 and beyond. 2 years after her rescue, Jaycee published her memoir, A Stolen Life. The book became a bestseller and offered a rare insight into the reality of long-term captivity and survival. She later founded the Jaycee Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping victims of kidnapping, trauma, and family separation rebuild their lives. Years after her rescue, one of Jaycee's therapists described her life in simple terms. She's doing well. She has built a future, raised her daughters, and is proud of what she has achieved. If you watch the story to the end, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Because in the end, this case is a reminder that while dozens of people overlooked the signs, 2 people paid attention. And sometimes, that is enough to change everything.